Good afternoon, everyone. So today here I am with my class number 11, and today let's discuss the third unit that you have in your Spring's text, that is the literature textbook. And the third unit that you have is actually a poem written by Khalil Gibran. Okay, the title of the poem is On Children. Okay, now in this poem we are going to see what the poet is actually telling us about the title, so-called title called On Children. So before I could start anything on that, let us give little more importance to what is the title is all about, and let us quickly have certain things in our mind before we go to the text. Okay, what do you feel or what do you think the moment you read the title like On Children? So when I ask you this question, I'm sure you might definitely come up with your own ways of interpretation to this title, and you would definitely think that on is actually a preposition that is used, and children is actually a common noun that is used. If I have to tell you something about the parts of speech of the title here, you have two words, and these two words belong to two different parts of speech in English, and this is how actually we talk, or this is how we actually take certain things into consideration to understand what is the title is all about. And moreover, it is actually a poem, and you got to give your specific attention towards understanding the title here. Okay, now when you look into these two words, on is always used as a preposition, which you all very well know about it, and on the other hand you have one more word that is nothing but children, which is also called as a common noun, not a specific, but of course yes, a common noun here. Okay, but when you read this title with the the preposition as well as the noun that we have there, okay, so you have your own things of interpreting it in your own way, isn't it? On children, you can say that probably this poem is written with respect to children, keeping children in mind, right? And maybe you might also think that maybe a father is writing a poem maybe on a children, or maybe a speaker in the poem is saying something about a parent to his or her child or a daughter, isn't it? In the similar way, what can this be all about on children is something that these are the questions that may come into your mind when you read the title here. So whatever you think in your mind about the title is actually on par with the text, on par with the poem that is we are going to study here. So first of all, let us know little more about the poet here, Khalil Gibran. So as the name itself suggests, so he is a Lebanese and American author as well as a poet. So on page number 17 in your text, you have been given a little more details about the poet here. Let us read that first, and then we will come on to the discussion about the poem on children. What is it all about? All right. Okay. So when you look into the note on the poet, you can read this way, like it is what been given in the text there. So I'll just read it for you. You can just follow it in your own text there, and then we will come on to the title of the poem. So as I said, Khalil, look at the spellings of the words very carefully, okay, because you may have to understand, or you may have to know it, though if you don't write the name of the poet, but who knows, you might have to write maybe the name of the poet also if the question demands, isn't it? So that's why be very specific about the spellings that are written on the board, and the name as well, the name of the poet along with its title. Yes. Khalil Gibran, born in the year 1883 and was died in the year 1931, is actually Lebanese, a country, Lebanon. Maybe you might have heard of it. A country by name Lebanon. So he belongs to both these countries. So he is always regarded or considered as a Lebanese American artist as well as a poet. Okay, the very first sentence tells him about where he comes from. So he is a man, one who belongs to both Lebanon as well as America. So he is a very known figure in these two countries with his origin, and he is known more as an artist as well as a poet. His poems are considered poetic essays. Now, what do you mean by poetic essays? So, to know more about what is poetic essay or what are poetic essays, I will explain it to you during my discussion of the poem. Okay, just understand that he is well known for all his work which are termed or called as the poetic essays, as they do not adhere to the usual versification. That is, there is a reason that has been given, like, most of all his poems are something which are essays. Hope you can understand. So, poetic essays, and they don't adhere, they don't come on par with the rules and regulations that have to be followed while writing the poem. So, he doesn't come under, or all his works doesn't come under something that is called as versification, like specific rules and regulations to be followed while writing a poem. Okay, let us not go more into detail about the rules and regulations while writing the poems. Let us just understand the specific fact that he doesn't adhere to any of these rules and regulations before writing a poem. Then, The Prophet. This is the title of his book, or this is one of the works that he has written. The Prophet is his best known work. The Prophet, the title, The Prophet, is his best known work and has been translated into more than 25 languages including Kannada. Okay, so you can understand his work, how famous it is and how recognized it is throughout the world. Okay, so The Prophet is one of the best works that he has written so far, which has been translated into more than 25 languages including Kannada. Then, On Children, this title of the poem is a selection from The Prophet, which offers a critique of the usual expectations of parents regarding their children and urges them to introspect. So, here you actually come to know what is the gist of the poem, or what is the theme of the poem, so to say. So, he says that this work, or this title, On Children, is actually a selection taken from his major work called The Prophet. So, in this poem, what the poet is going to discuss, or what the poet is going to tell us, is all about the expectations. This offers a critique, C-R-I-T-I-Q-U-E. Critique means something that talks about ill as well as good, bad and ill both about something, like, so you might have heard of critiques. What do normally a critic does? A critic's job is to say both positives as well as the negatives of any work or any movie or something. So, this word critic is something that is usually understood by all of you, because you actually read and reviews, go for the reviews and all those stuffs, isn't it? Especially if I have to take an example, if some movie comes or something, a review is written of that, and then there is a critic who talks about all good things in it, or there is a critic one who talks about only the ill things about it, or there is a critic one who can write both the ways, right? Good as well as bad. In the similar way, this poem On Children is actually a critique. It stands, it works as a critique of the usual expectations of parents regarding their children. So, this poem is all about expectations from their parents, from the parents on their children. So, can you understand now? On children. Okay, expectations of parents on their children. Maybe you can understand it in that way. And urges them to introspect. Urges them, something that gives room or space. Urges them to introspect. What is introspection? Questions, asking questions, getting things clarified. So, this is a poem that is about the relationship between the parents and their children in terms of how the life goes on. Okay, now this is something about the poet that is given, and now let me straight away come on to the title, as I've already told you. So before I could start anything, my usual way, you will have to definitely look into the pre-reading activity. There are 3 questions given in the pre-reading activity of the poem, which you need to read and introspect. You got to introspect. So the very first question on the pre-reading activity is that what do your parents expect of you? So all general questions you can just think of in your own examples as your individual selves. You can just think of this. What do your parents expect of you? The other question, what do you expect of your parents? So expectation is the core thing here, and you have children on one side and you have the parents on the other. What are the expectations? This is a very good philosophical, or it is a very good personal kind of a poem, which gives us a lot of information about the relationship between a child and a father or a mother. So when you actually read the poem, you will come to know, like, what exactly is the relationship between the children and their parents. Okay, so you will definitely learn a lot, and at the same time you will have to be very specific, at the same time serious in terms of expectations from parents and vice versa. That is, you can expect from your parents, at the same time the parents also expect a lot of things from you, isn't it? So this is how something life goes on. So the word expectation is very, very important, where you have the other 2 options here, or there are other 2 things that are there which has to be done in a way to understand and introspect your own life. Hope I'm clear. Right. So on one hand you have a question about what do you expect from your parents, on the other hand what your parents expect from you. These are the 2 questions that you have to understand, right? And then he gives one general statement in the form of 3rd question, and that 3rd question is nothing but, have you ever felt your parents are too possessive or they are demanding? Okay, then he gives a individual question to understand, to introspect your own selves with respect to your parents, that have you ever thought or felt that your parents are possessive of you? Possessive, something that is where too much of love, something that is too much passion, something like that, and are they sometimes demanding? Okay, he gives you 2 options here, or he gives you 2 important aspects of a life, that whether your parents are possessive about you, or whether sometimes do they become demanding. So when you take these 2 terms, possessiveness and demanding, okay, obviously a parent will always be possessive about his or her son or a daughter. On the other hand, being we as children, maybe yes, you also become possessive of your parents, but sometimes you do also become demanding, as your parents also do. Getting? So please follow this discussion or follow this poem very, very carefully, so that you will understand what the poet actually wants to tell us through this title called On Children. Okay, now coming to the poem here, I was telling you something about a poetic essays, isn't it? What do you mean by poetic essay or something? So when you actually look into the poem, you feel, when you start reading the poem, you will understand that there is no figure of speech, there are no rhyming words, there is no music, all right, there is no, what can I say, something that is always related to a poem or a poetic style is nowhere used. So that's why I was very, very clear while reading about the poet. I told you that he is a man, Khalil Gibran is a man, one who doesn't adhere to any kind of a versification while writing the poems. All right. So actually when you look into the poem, when you start reading it for the first time, maybe second time or maybe third time, you will understand that it is more of a descriptive than a poetic language. So whatever the words or the lines that are being used by the poet here are more of descriptive rather than poetic. Okay, so now let us just start discussing on a title called On Children. So before I could start, I have given you certain hints, okay, about the author when we spoke, or about the poet when we spoke about. He gives, like, this poem becomes a kind of a critique, C-R-I-C-I-T-I-Q-U-E, critique. It becomes a critique in terms of relationship between a father, mother, or a son or a daughter. So to say, children and parents, it becomes a kind of a device or a poetic device where it becomes a kind of a critique between parents and children in terms of their life to introspect. Expectation again is another word that is used, and when you actually look into the pre-reading activity about those 3 questions, you will very clearly understand that what could be the poem is all about. So when you actually look into this poem, you will understand, or your expectation from the children, or being a child, your expectation from the father or from your mother should definitely change. On the other hand, even being parents, even their perspective on their children should also change. So that's why I said it's more of a philosophical, and at the same time it is more of a descriptive kind of a poem or so. Okay, so what I do is that I'll just read it for one time today, alright, and probably I'll give you some more time to think on that, and probably when I come back next time for the next class, we will discuss it. Alright, so let us have one quick reading now, and let us take certain things into consideration, and probably in the next class we shall discuss this. Alright, okay. Now, he starts the poem with a conjunction. Look into the word, or look into the line that he starts the poem. But before that, understand that this is an extract from his major work called The Prophet. So there is a segment or a section is taken from his main work, The Prophet. Keep that thing in your mind and then start reading it. Alright? Okay. Now, and a woman who held a babe against her bosom said, "Speak to us of children." Speak to us of children. What is the title? On Children. Speak to us of children. Okay. Now, and he said, the very second line of the poem is, and he said. Let us see what he says. He says, your children are not your children. They are the sons and daughters of life's longing for itself. They come through you, but not from you. And though they are with you, yet they belong not to you. You may give them your love, but not your thoughts. For they have their own thoughts. You may house their bodies, but not their souls. For their souls dwell in the house of tomorrow, which you cannot visit, not even in your dreams. You may strive to be like them, but seek not to make them like you. For life goes not backward, nor tarries with yesterday. You are the bows from which your children as living arrows are sent forth. The archer seeks the mark upon the path of the infinite, and he bends you with his might that his arrows may go swift and far. Let your bending in the archer's hand be for gladness, for even as he loves the arrows that flies, so he loves also the bow that is stable. Don't you think that it is more of a descriptive one rather than a poem? isn't it? So if I ask you to comprehend a poem or something, if it is exactly written, or if it is any work from maybe Shakespearean sonnet or maybe William Wordsworth or so, when you read that, yeah, your mind sometimes may go blank, or sometimes you may have your own ways of interpreting the text. But here it is not the case. When you actually read it, you will come to know, like, what the speaker wants to tell us. So that's why I told you about the type of the works that he writes. This is something which is more of a descriptive rather than a poetic. Okay, so I'll just stop here in this class here, and probably in the next class we will go to line by line, word by word for the discussion. Meanwhile, what I want is that, so you have to read the poem once again, okay, and just jot down or write down or note down whatever the points that come to your mind, the time or the moment you read it, okay, thoroughly. Okay, when you read that, make some jot down some points or something, and tomorrow, let us in the class when we discuss it, you will actually come to realize, so that you can listen to what I say, and then you can have your own thoughts, you can have your own review of the poem, so to say. So you become a critic now, okay, you become a critic in reading this poem and writing down the things that come into your mind. And in the next class, let us have a discussion on that, so that you can understand the poem in a better way. All right, so let me conclude this class by saying that, like, have your one way reading of the poem once or twice or whatsoever, and then make your own reviews in terms of writing down certain points that come to your mind the moment you read it, and have things ready for the next class, so that when we discuss the things in the next class, or when I discuss this poem in the next class, let us see how far is it matching, and how can you connotate, or how can you connect whatever the points that you had in your mind and whatever I discussed, so that you can have an absolute understanding of the poem in terms of taking the things into consideration. All right, so thank you, and I shall meet you in the next class with the discussion on the poem. Thank you so much.